your host as usual, Arian Foster, and I have another Skype edition and a very special guest, man. And we just recently found out that we are fans of each other, and if it wasn't for a random fan on Twitter, we probably never would have known. And I appreciate you joining me, man. We got David Pakman on the show. He's hosted the David Pakman Show. Has a huge following online and YouTube and other various outlets, man. So I appreciate you taking out the time to join us, man.
Thank you. No, it's awesome to be with you.
For sure, man. For sure, man. Yeah. So as I stated, man, I'm a big fan. I was subscribed to your YouTube channel for a while now, and a Twitter fan reached out. I guess you're kind of doing random podcasts, or you asked your Twitter fans whose podcast should I jump on, and one of your fans said mine, and you were like, I'd love to, and that's how we kicked off. And so I have a whole bunch of questions, a whole bunch of things I want to get into, man. But I kind of want to dig into who you are as a person before we get into everything that you subscribe to and what the things you believe. But how did you start getting into politics, and then the transition to like radio and online media? Like how did that whole transition start? Because I've always been interested in that journey.
I grew up in politics. I mean, my family was always super political, so I was always interested in politics. But in college, I started interning at a radio station and doing my own thing, building a show, seeing classmates end up in jobs they didn't really like. And I figured I would try to do this show as long as possible and see if I could turn it into a business and a way to earn a living. So that was like my motivation to keep pushing the show. I was always into the political part of it. It was just sort of natural that I'd be talking about politics. And I went to grad school straight after undergrad, and again I saw my classmates becoming bankers and financial advisors and stuff that I'm sure is great for them, but I didn't want any part of. Right. So I just kept going, and eventually, you know, we got some investors and was able to hire a team, and now it's my thing. It's my full-time thing.
Yeah, it's very well run. There's kind of this growing. The age of the internet is a special time, man. It's a funny place to be alive right now, and there's this growing independent media out there that's kind of just been brewing in our society, and I believe that you have a very big voice in it, especially people who align with my ideology. So, I hate categorizing it like this, but like the left or liberal or whatever the case may be. I don't even know how to describe it anymore, because there's so many different terms and subsets of those terms, and it just gets messy, man. But like, there's not a lot of left-leaning independent media that is as prominent as the opposition. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And this is a major problem. I mean, I've been talking for a while about how the right is just super well organized. They're super well funded. I mean, if you look at, I hate to like promote people that I don't think are doing good things, but just like for our conversation, there's this group Turning Point USA, and they've got this guy named Charlie Kirk, and Candace Owens is involved with them. And it's like they have a farm team and they fund it. Yeah. And they train these people, and they spit out of college, sometimes they don't even go to college, really well-prepared, well-spoken activists on the right. And they go on to have shows. They have a whole system of funding these shows, and they're just better organized than the people on the left are. It's all there is to it.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. And the interesting thing is this, is when you kind of step back and analyze that situation, because I mean, politics is not my forte, right? And it never was. And I didn't get really into politics until after I retired from the NFL. And then I was always somewhat aware. You know, I was a history fan growing up. I paid attention in school, and I always did my independent research, but it was never like my shtick. But coming out of the NFL when I after I retired, I realized that the climate in this country was huge. And once you dig into the reasons why, politics is the core of that. And so when you step back and analyze that situation, you go down the internet rabbit hole, and you're trying to find things that you really trying to challenge myself is what I did. Trying to challenge myself, trying to test my ideologies, see if there's people out there who are like-minded, and that's exactly what I found. But the small pockets of the things that I believe in aren't being represented. And it's just like you said, the right seems to brand themselves way better. And it's kind of I don't mind rational discourse, right, at all. But I think the issue is that they're kind of using it's kind of indicative of America's culture. Is like we love blood, like we love it, and so they kind of spew these talking points and these just things that can't necessarily be verified if you really dig into it.
Yeah, and I was just talking about this with like a guy who does talent management for a lot of people in my space, and he was saying that there's a lot of people who take these super black and white positions. They take the most extreme position possible on every issue because it gets attention. But in the long run, it's just like a huge disservice to actually figuring out the problems of society, because most stuff is a gray area. That's kind of the reality. Yeah. And that if you're able to have more rational discourse that understands that, even if you're on the left and you think your position is like 90% of the way there often will be some 10% where the other side maybe is making a point. And this is not me saying that the right spot is just in the middle of the left and right. Often it's not. But it's very profitable to just pick the most extreme position you can and get as much attention as possible with it. But everybody loses in the long run when you do that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 1,000%. And that's kind of what I've done is I follow a lot of right-wing media, like a lot of them, and I roll my eyes on a daily basis because it's on my feed. But I kind of find it necessary for growth, like because every now and then, just like you said, there'll be something in there. It's like, you know what, that it lends credence to the things that I believe in, and the things that I've researched. But like you said, it's kind of ripping the fabric of and I'm not necessarily I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. You said it's not good for the long run, and I'm unsure because I think it had to come to a boiling point, because like you said, it's extremes, right? It's extremes, but I think it had to come to a boiling point because I think that rhetoric has been bubbling for a while. I think in my communities we felt it for sure, right? So you hear a lot of rhetoric from them about the whole police brutality thing. Well, we've had this notion in our head for years, and we didn't necessarily have the data to back it up, and I don't think we still do, because a lot of social science is anecdotal, and so you can't really justify some of the things people are feeling with statistics, and I think that's a huge sword that they like to poke into people as well. But social science just isn't regular science. So as you're navigating your way through this shark-infested pools of politics, man, what's one of the things that you've I guess could say like learned from the other side? Because I don't think that everybody's evil in this, but I do think there are provocateurs. But I've learned a lot from the other side as well.
I mean, this is like kind of not a great thing to learn. I wish it wasn't something I had learned, but the facts ultimately don't matter. I mean, it's a disappointment, and you're kind of alluding to that also. The facts really don't matter because most political decisions are being made based on kind of like the way the wind is blowing in public opinion. Right. And what determines that is, can you make people afraid of stuff? Fear is like an awesome motivator to get people to go and vote in a particular way or to donate to a particular cause. And can you make an argument that sounds good in like 15 seconds, right? And this is the problem for a lot of the left, that like I often use the example of taxes, where like the right has this awesome position in that it's simple, which is it's my money. Taxes, it's my money. I should just keep as much of that as possible. Lower taxes are good. It's like so concise and simple and perfect. It's not realistic in any way. And then you go to the left, and it's not like the left has the opposite, where they go, we want the highest taxes possible. No, it's like the left says, well, yeah, everybody wants to keep as much of the money they've earned, but we live in society. And if you want roads and police and fire, you have to find some amount of, you've lost, right? Like people are already bored.
Yeah.
So that is one of those things where once you understand that, and there are people on the left who get that and are trying to frame issues in a more appealing way. It sucks that it's basically what can you make shiny and attractive rather than can you have really substantive discussions and figure out complicated stuff. But the right is just excellent at it.
It's kind of like that's shitty because it's kind of like a lose-lose because it's like what they sell is, like you said, it's more sexy. So like fear always sells, blood always sells, and that's a lot of their talking points. You hit on a point that I love to talk with people about, man, which is taxes and this whole. It's a huge and it's so intricate. It's a huge debate in our country and it's a lot of the right talking points right now is no socialism, communism, Marxism, versus democratic socialism. If you could break down those terms a little bit, just for my viewers who aren't 100% aware, I want to have a little bit of a conversation about that.
Okay, so there's huge confusion right now, and there's a lot of straw manning going on, and we can talk about what that means also. So basically, if you're Marxism is a specific type of socialism, communism that was espoused by Karl Marx. When people talk about communism, they're usually referring to like Stalinism and Leninism in early 20th century Soviet Russia. That's where the government owns the means of production. So like instead of me owning my business, socialism would be all of my employees share ownership, and communism would be the government owns it and tells the people who works at that business, right? So these are like different versions. And the problem that we're seeing right now is that a lot of stuff that's not any of these things, that's just kind of like Norwegian social democracy, are being called socialism by the right. So like an example would be socialized healthcare. Right. People hear socialized and they say, well, that must be socialism. But when you look at Norway and Sweden and Denmark, where I just was, these are capitalist economies, but they've figured out that everybody's better off when you don't have to pay for healthcare the way we do in the United States. So they've socialized just that element of society. But it's still capitalism. People can still have their own businesses. You can still make profit. And what the right has kind of successfully done is mess with the terms where they will start talking about how bad socialism or communism or Marxism are, which are perfectly fine debates to have. But there's really no big clamoring in the United States to become an actual socialist nation or a communist nation. We're basically talking about like Scandinavian style reforms, education, healthcare, that type of thing.
And this is what I don't understand about like their position on it is that they don't necessarily view the police or military or roads or anything like that as socialist institutions or socialized institutions.
Depends who you talk to. Right. I mean, so
sorry for having you still man their position.
No, I mean, so like, okay, if you are like an extreme libertarian, you might make the case that the government shouldn't even be providing police and that roads should be built by private citizens who then can charge people to use those roads. And, if the market allows you to charge a certain amount for people to use your road, then that's great. And if nobody uses the road, you'll lower your price, right? They have this like idea of like a total free market libertarian situation, which is completely unrealistic. I think most of the right is not making those extreme arguments, not to defend them, not to steel man them, as you're saying, but I think most of the right is just wanting healthcare and education to remain in the for-profit sector. And in order to do that, they are pretending as though Danish healthcare is socialist when it's not.
That's another thing I don't understand is why are we always putting ideas in juxtaposition with past civilizations. I think it's a lot of false equivalency going on, because you have things that nobody had in the past, like the internet. That is a huge differentiating factor in my humble opinion. Does that ever? I mean, I can't wrap my mind around that. Like, why we're always comparing to past civilizations?
It's because it's politically clever to do it.
Right.
Because if you can convince people that Danish or Swedish style healthcare is bad because Stalin killed millions of people in Russia, you can get people to say, I don't want Swedish style healthcare, even if they don't have anything to do with each other.
Right.
So it's like it's a political calculation, and unfortunately it works because a lot of people don't understand the historical references.
And I think this is my problem with politics in general. Is I hope I don't butcher this, but I think it was Socrates, and he was I think he was talking about democracy, and how the fall kind of democracy would be if you have a whole people putting people in power or voting on issues that are not informed enough to do so. It's gonna be chaos, which I think is what's going on now. It's like you can go to Bernie Sanders, losing the word. What is it? Rally. Sorry. You can go to Bernie Sanders rally, Trump rally, or whatever the case, right or left, both extremes, and you're gonna find people in the crowd that you can randomly interview, and you're gonna have some stupid people that you're going to interview. Like, it's just the case.
Yeah. Okay. So I agree with you that you can, if you've got a rally with 1,000 people, you can find people who don't know anything, no matter what the rally's for,
right,
and you can make them look really bad.
Right.
The only thing I would disagree with you about is that I don't know what extreme ideas Bernie's presenting at the rally. I'm sure you can find
right,
people at the rallies who have some extreme ideas, but most of Bernie's ideas are like totally mainstream in Northern Europe.
Right. No. I wasn't necessarily saying his ideas. I'm just saying extreme, not even say extreme, just left and right, just opposite ends of the spectrum, and like you'll see people, like you said, that just are uninformed, and I think that's the issue now. Is there's so much misinformation, and it's why I'm grateful for people like yourself who are honest in their reporting and honest in their delivery of their message, because I really think you try to be objective. I don't think you try to do a lot of clickbait. I don't think you try to do anything that's dishonest. I think you try to really give people an honest calculation of the events as you see it. And
exactly, yeah. It's what I call I comment in good faith. So like you can disagree with my conclusions, or you could tell me my priorities are wrong, or you can tell me that I just don't understand an issue, but I'm not deliberately distorting the facts on which I base my opinion. Like let's debate whether I'm coming to the right conclusions or not, but I'm not arguing in bad faith, which unfortunately a lot of people do. Because in a way they have no choice. If you're defending the indefensible, you kind of have no choice but to argue in bad faith.
Yeah, and that's one of the I think my big if anybody wants to kind of present themselves as a rational thinker, one of your tools is exactly that, just being honest with yourself and doing your best not to live inside of the echo chamber that you create, because there's nobody mandating you follow anybody or anything that you follow. Like, so you have to cognizantly seek out things that you disagree with and see if it still fits your narrative or if you're comfortable in that worldview.
One of the best things you can do is just say, okay, here's my opinion about this issue. What is the best argument against it? What's the best possible argument? Not that I believe it, but like what argument could someone come up with that would be the most dangerous to what I now believe? And then figure out if you can argue against that best position. So like I recently did a death penalty debate, and to prepare, I went through, and with death penalty, like I'm pretty familiar with most of the arguments in favor of it. I'm against it. What are the best arguments someone can make for the death penalty? It deters crime. It's fair. It's in the interests of society. Cost, whatever, go through them and then figure out, well, how would I argue against those arguments? And if I can't, maybe they're good arguments. I didn't find that, by the way, but that's like the best way, I think, to examine your own beliefs.
No, that's beautiful. Those are the kind of people I love to hang out with, man. So next time I'm in Boston, man, I'm gonna take you to dinner. Cause like
Please.
it's a serious like I think it's a serious thing in that you have a responsibility to be an informed citizen, and you having some kind of self-checking process is imperative. Cause you'll just fall victim to your own bias, and I see it all the time. And what's worse is, I follow all these right-leaning outlets, and it's more like an performance than anything else now. And then I'll get with people that I know who are a little bit right of what I believe, and they're just spitting out talking points rather than like trying to really have a conversation. And that shit is frustrating as hell. I'm like, I know exactly where you got that from. It's
Right.
annoying.
Yeah. And this also, I mean, this isn't 100% related to this, but you talked about the responsibility that exists there. All right. I like to always make the point that people who say, I'm just kind of like not into politics and I don't vote, I don't get involved, that's a decision, and it's not a neutral decision. Because when only half of the population votes, the non-voters are a huge factor in who ends up making decisions for you, right? Like, we have 100 senators, and it's not just the people who vote that decide who those 100 senators are. Everybody who chooses not to vote is making a decision that's not a neutral decision. And so if you aren't pleased with how society is organized right now, and your solution or your decision is not to vote, you're actually part of how we got to where we are.
I would agree with you. My former self would not agree with you, but I agree with you now, for sure.
So you used to have that same idea that
Yeah, I used to have almost a conspiracy theory idea where it's like they put people, they picked the president before years, and like that's how far I've come. But that's where I used
Interesting.
To be. Yeah, I used to be really like conspiracy theoried out. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not.
How did you get out of that? Because a lot of conspiracy theorists I talk to, it's like they're in a circle, so there's like no way out, where evidence for their conspiracy reinforces it, but then lack of evidence is part of the conspiracy. So like, it's like a room with no door, you know?
Jesus Christ. No, it's a great way of framing it, because it's exactly right. I don't think I was ever I don't think I was ever really ready to die on any hill, right? I've always been open-minded, and I think that's the kind of the doorway for conspiracy theories is you're open-minded, right? You kind of like, for the most part. But for me it was, and so I didn't really understand or care to understand how to validate the information that was coming in. So a lot of the things that I thought I knew was kind of just hearsay. And what got me out of it was my interest in science. And I started really falling in love. It was really gravity. Gravity was the thing that got me interested in science. I saw a documentary on Einstein, and I was like, this shit is so interesting to me. So I dove in really deep on like what gravity was, and special relativity, general relativity, and then that led me into other sciences and just the methodology of how we prove things to be true to the degree that we can as human beings. And once I really understand, and also I was a philosophy major, so I was always an outward thinker, like how far out can I go? But bringing it all back, I think it was just at the end of the day, how true are the things that we say to be true, and that I lost sleep because of that. I didn't understand, and so after a while, it made me really question every single position in my life. And I think to be a well-rounded human being, to be a kind human being, to be a compassionate human being, I have to find reasons why. Like, I have to know why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I'm thinking the way I'm thinking. I'm really interested in this thing called life, and to bring it back all around, like that's basically what drew me back in.
Was this like when you were in the NFL and you were into some of this stuff, were you an outlier in that these were the things you were thinking about and looking at?
Yeah, I think my religious ideologies, definitely. There's not many atheists in the NFL.
Oh, is that true?
Yeah, there's not many.
Huh.
I think I've only seen like a couple actually. For some reason, football is extremely indoctrinated in religion, especially Christianity. It's just like I know the Our Father prayer by heart because since I was a kid, we said it before every game, and I just didn't think anything of it. But it's just
Huh.
it's extremely inundated with religion. I'm not sure why. I think it's because it came from the South, and so that Southern culture kind of cultivated that mindset. But yeah, no, and then,
Interesting.
yeah, no, it really is. It really is. I wanted to do like a short like little docu series on it of not just football but just sports in general. How it's super, it's interwoven with religion. It's
I mean, from the outside, it sort of does seem like the NBA is probably like the more progressive of the major sports leagues as far as the players and the organization, but I don't know if that's accurate. Like football and baseball always seem way more like status quo, good old boys,
yeah,
you
no,
know?
yeah. I think it is, and I think the reason is because the NBA, there for a while they didn't have the best viewership. It was when the commissioner at the time put dress codes for the players and stuff like that.
Yep.
But there was a shift in management, and where they realized this is what needs to happen in the NFL. But there was a shift in management where they realized that the players are the league. It's not this. It's not the shield. Like the NFL loves the brand. Like, oh, the shield is like fuck the shield. I used to tell them that when I was in those meetings. I was like, fuck the shield. The players are the league. And granted, the league is its separate entity, but the players make the league go, and they brand their players, and they let their players be individuals, and the overseers of the NBA are more progressive than the NFL as well. Though they advocate their players to be social about social issues. I mean to be loud about it, and they advocate it for sure.
Would you say like in the locker room, if there's political talk, it's mostly right wingers that are playing in the NFL, or are there like a lot of non-political people?
Nah, I would say it's more left than not. But I don't want to be disrespectful, but I, I wasn't into politics when I was playing Super. Like it was like I really got into it probably when I was like 25, 26 is when I really started paying attention for real.
Yep.
And then, but even then it was loosely. So I was spitting out talking points, left leaning talking points, without understanding the real issues. And so I think that's the issue in the NFL or the NBA is you have an expertise, and your expertise is your sport, and it takes up a lot of your time and a lot of your energy. And so I don't think that there is enough time in your day to be somebody like you who knows you can sit here and have a healthcare debate and know all the ins and outs and spit out policies that Obama wrote and Trump wrote, and you know points in it, and you can say Section C, say you can do all that. I don't think there's enough time for that, so you kind of just gloss over and align with things that are kind of your cup of tea.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. I mean, I'm interested in the whole idea of like the teams wanting the players to be who they are, because the players ultimately are sort of like what sell the tickets. With the entire kneeling for the anthem thing, every time I have a debate with a right winger about it, I just actually I was in LA, and this guy Jesse Lee Peterson interviewed me about it.
Man, bro, I'm gonna let you finish your point, but
Yeah.
you showed so much patience. I was watching it. I was watching it with my lady, and she was like, why does that dude have any kind of platform? Like I thought it was a parody. I thought it was a parody.
I thought it's indistinguishable from a parody.
It's insanity. But
it's insanity. But the thing was, so, I've always made the point that ultimately nobody's doing anything illegal when they kneel during the anthem. Right. It's not a question of legality. So really it just kind of comes down to like, how do the teams manage their employees, and do they want to put a rule in a handbook which says, here's what you have to do during the anthem, or they just say nothing about it type of thing. Yeah. So it seems to me that the number one factor in terms of how the teams manage it would just be, how is it going to influence ticket sales, right? Like, isn't that what they care about most? Or is there something you don't see from the outside that's like more than that?
That's a heavy question. I think it's a little bit of both. Definitely ticket sales. I don't think it's necessarily ticket sales. I think viewership is more important than ticket sales to them.
Audience, I guess you would
Yeah,
say.
yeah. So yes. But here was the interesting thing about, and I'll answer your question, but here's the interesting thing about that protest to me. Because I was a player that partook in it when it first happened on 9/11, got death threats, all of that. But here's the
Yep.
interesting thing. Since Colin got blackballed from the league, allegedly, um, I lean towards yes. But since he got blackballed from the league, you have a lot of black folks who are like, I'm not watching NFL anymore, right? And then the opposite is those NFL players aren't respecting America. I'm not watching. So you have both sides boycotting a league, saying they're boycotting the league over the exact same issue. I found that ironically hilarious, and I have no idea. I don't understand either side, honestly. I really don't understand either side. But to answer your question,
Yeah.
it's really weird. But anyway, to answer your question, um, I think that the ownership in the NFL is it's really the management. So like Roger Goodell, the people who are overseeing and making all these decisions, they're really bad with being proactive about things. So they're extremely good at being reactive to things. Even when the whole domestic violence issue was a big issue in the NFL, right? They're just really bad at getting ahead of it because they're just so scared to look like people have flaws and people have issues. Like they're just I don't understand that when domestic violence is an issue that doesn't just affect NFL players. It affects police officers, military, lawyers, doctors. It is a huge problem in this country. And you had an ample opportunity to be the forefront of that conversation, to usher that conversation. And that's the beautiful thing about sports or any kind of platform is you can bring awareness to these situations and have real conversations, which is what Colin initiated. But I think that when Colin did what he did, and when we all joined him, I think they had no idea the ramifications that could have came from it, and they were trying to clean up as best they could, and they had no idea. On top of that, I do believe that the majority of ownership in the NFL is extremely right wing leaning, and that's exactly how the culture in the NFL is kind of played out, right? It's not analogous to slavery, but it is in a sense. It's just like you just do what you're told and shut the fuck up. Like that's how they view us. They don't view us like the NBA views their players, where it's like this is a partnership. Like LeBron James can get on the phone and call Adam. I think it's Silver.
Yeah.
Anytime he wants, or whatever the case. Like I couldn't get Roger Goodell on an email. I tried to track this dude down when the whole Ray Rice situation happened because I had something wanted to say to him because I grew up in a domestically violent household and I was like, yo, this is an important topic. We should explore this. I was trying to get him on my email. I called the office and I got a call back and they're like, what exactly do you need to talk to him about? I'm like, get him on the fucking phone. Like he's not the president. It was insane. But
Wow.
I just think that's just how they don't view players of any kind of value. I think they just view them like cattle, honestly.
Like a commodity almost, it sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's like what? I mean, is it about like 1,200 NFL players total? I'm trying to do some quick math.
53 on a roster at any given time with 8 practice squad players, so 61 times 32. I'm not doing that in my head.
Yeah, so there's like 1,800 players like in the ecosystem, so to speak.
Right.
So it's not like everybody's constantly trying to talk to Roger Goodell, I would guess. It's a little surprising that it would be that difficult to just get on the phone with him, you know?
I mean, I was surprised just like anybody else. I think it was more ridiculous than anything else. Because I don't want a picture of him. I just want to talk to you about an issue. You know what I'm saying?
You're not trying to get his autograph, yeah.
Exactly, man. But man, kind of doubling back to what we were talking about. I've heard both sides of this issue. I don't want to get your take on it. Do you think that Donald Trump was good for America, and not by any kind of policy standards or not by any kind of ideology standards, but this is why I kind of make the argument I think it was okay because he got so many people involved in politics that wouldn't necessarily get involved in politics, and now it's kind of riled up dormant voters, in my opinion. What do you
Okay,
think?
so if there is one argument that could be made about how, in some kind of like long-term time horizon, Trump will be positive for America, it would be that. That would be the one argument, which is like 2 days after the guy was elected, you had marches, you had hundreds of thousands of people, etc. The thing is, we're not going to know that for a while because like we haven't even had our first election since he was elected. So in a couple of weeks, we'll have that. We'll have midterms. Right. If there seems to be record turnout in some of these races, and people in midterms vote even less than in presidential elections. So like it's possible that he will inspire so much activism that in 20 years we would say it all happened because Trump was elected and the country realized the disaster that opening up that door was to these sort of like this coarsening of the political discourse and so on and so forth. I don't think we're going to know that for 10 or 20 years. In the short term, the policy has all been disastrous.
The funny thing is, the irony is, either way, it's going to stroke his ego somehow.
Exactly. Right. Either he changed politics in a way that led to kind of like the alt-right taking over the country and he can take responsibility, or he was so influential in making the entire country realize like this is as far as we go. We've got to like get involved at this point.
Yo, that's hilarious. That's so funny to me though.
But he might not be alive when we actually figure out which one it is.
That's true. That's true. You forget. Yeah, you're 100% right. So what? I mean, what do you think though? Do you think he was or he wasn't? I'm not sure.
Good for the country?
Yeah.
I think that he so far it's been a disaster for the country. I mean, you've got anything you can identify that seems like it's going okay. I would just challenge you to tell me what it is that Trump did to cause it, right? So like in a recent interview, I was asked, isn't it great that we have all these jobs now, unemployment's low? And my question would just be, well, what exactly did Trump do that we can say that's because of him? You know, I don't know what the policy argument would be, but the most concerning thing to me is just these alliances that he's destroyed with a lot of other countries that are historically our friends and allies, where now we're not even part of the conversation. You know, France and Germany and all these other countries where normally we're in the room for these conversations, they don't. It's just like Trump's not a factor anymore, and that's not good for the United States.
And see, that's what, because I think this is what I realized about politics lately is it's just so much every day, and I know it's part of your job, so you have to be on the know of this. So I miss a lot, right? And I think the average American does too. So when you say he's kind of ruined some of our alliances, and you mentioned France or Germany or something like that, is that like an active? Have they put out any statements, or is it kind of like?
No. I mean, diplomacy, everybody but Trump understands that that's not how diplomacy works, so you don't do stuff like that. But, you know, he announces he's pulling out of the Paris climate deal. Okay. So then we hear he's not even invited to climate talks. I don't remember if it was in Switzerland or where it was. Why would the United States not be part of that conversation? I mean, we use like 25% of the world's energy, even though we only have 4% of the population. Wow. We should be part of that conversation because we're a huge part of the problem. And if we're going to have a solution, we got to be part of the solution. Right. Trump doesn't seem to even get it. He said climate change is a hoax created by China. And so when we're not even part of these conversations, everybody loses. It doesn't matter if you voted for the guy or not. Like, I didn't vote for him, but I still lose because the French president and the German chancellor realize we don't even need to talk to Trump about this issue. He just doesn't get it.
That's insanity, man. Yeah. I'm trying to figure out a way to phrase this. Because you hear it a lot from people that say, how can Trump be racist? He's black unemployment rate, Mexican unemployment rate, like all of these things. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they just have an extremely narrow view of the trend in this country that has been. Like, if you just zoom out and go to the previous, it's been trending that way. Am I wrong in that assessment? I mean, those are the numbers and the graphs I see.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. I mean, like, first of all, does it really matter if he's personally racist or personally anti-Semitic or whatever. I mean, it's interesting, and I guess I kind of am curious whether he is.
I think a little bit, yeah.
Maybe he is, but what really matters is what is the effect of the policy. Right. So in the end, like with the anti-Semitism issue, it's like on the one hand, he uses all these phrases that the white nationalists seem to love. On the other hand, his son-in-law is Jewish, Jared Kushner. So like, is he personally anti-Semitic? I don't think it really matters. It's more a matter of like, what is the policy? Are hate crimes against Jews up or down under Trump's presidency? What's he doing about it? So like his sincerely held beliefs are relevant, but they're not the most important thing. That's sort of like number one. So then you get into kind of what you're saying, which is, if he takes credit for something that was trending a particular way anyway, is that an accomplishment or is it not really an accomplishment? So like when unemployment goes down, in general, Black unemployment goes down, Hispanic unemployment goes down, white unemployment goes down. So if you have people that are living lives, like you said, not everybody's following politics as closely as I probably do. They just see the headlines. They don't apply that much critical thinking to them, not because the people are ignorant, but because they're living their life. Right. And then it gets into their head and they're like, Black unemployment it's down, it's low. And then you have to say, wait a second, unemployment's just down. He hasn't done anything specific to target that issue. And then we've got to think about like, okay, so do we vote for him again because Black unemployment's down? Right. Or is that not really a good reason to vote for him?
See, that's a huge, kind of like what we were talking about at the beginning, right? Where the right is kind of branded themselves like this. And a huge wave that I see, and you see it with like the woman you mentioned, Candace Owens. She's somehow gotten to Kanye West and
yep.
There's this wave of right-leaning thought that says Black people need to get off of the Democratic plantation. Like that's the phrase that she uses and they use a whole lot.
Yep.
I don't know exactly how to feel about that, right? And I'll tell you why. I don't think that, and this is where like a policy expert like you can learn me on this, and this is why a huge reason why I do this podcast, to talk to people that I don't necessarily frequent. So I'm not a huge fan of politicians in general. I think a lot of them. I think there's a lot of crooked stuff going on, a lot of money under the table, a lot of lies. But I can't pinpoint a whole lot of policies that directly are, because they're not going to be written like they were in the 1800s, pointing out the racism in them. It's going to be really covert, right? So the three strikes that Bill Clinton passed, or I think it was the three strikes thing, that was hugely effective in our communities, and that was a Democratic policy, right? So I'm unconvinced that Republicans want to see, especially the Republicans in power, want to see people of color extremely fruitful in this country. I find it hard to believe that, but as well as the Democrats. So when I hear something like that, as get off the Democratic plantation, I'm not a huge advocate of politicians in general. How as in your expertise, how do you decipher that message?
Okay, so I mean, the first thing would be when Republicans say, and Jesse Lee Peterson said it the other day to me. He made the argument that Black people are on a Democratic plantation. Mm-hmm. It might sound like they're saying we want better for people of color. We want them not to be sort of like captive of the Democratic Party because we want what's best for them, right? They frame it like this is because they want good things for a particular population. But it's also extraordinarily sort of discriminatory in the sense that arguing that a population as diverse as Black Americans across the country who live in different social situations, different cultural situations, different economic situations, that they would be so easily controlled by the Democratic Party as to be tricked in so many elections to disproportionately supporting Democrats. I mean, to give another example, American Jews, like I grew up Jewish. I'm not religious, but like culturally, I'm Jewish. Jews are very liberal, and they overwhelmingly vote for Democrats in the United States, maybe even to a similar degree as Black Americans. Like, it's very high. It's like around 80% of Jews vote for Democrats in presidential elections.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. And does that mean that in the same way Democrats are, to use an analogy, do Jews need to get out of the Democratic concentration camp, right? Like, that's sort of like the same thing, right? Which is to say that they're in some way enslaved by the Democratic Party. Right. No, in the same way that Black Americans have accurately identified that in total, they are going to be better off if Democratic policy is in place than Republican policy. American Jews have figured out that aside from the fact that Republicans claim to be these big supporters of Israel, most American Jews live in the United States, not in Israel, and they figured out, like, we prefer Democratic policy. That's what it is. So I think that there's this kind of like insulting nature of the right saying, we want what's best for Black Americans. They need to get off the plantation. The idea that they are so easily sort of duped by Democrats is part of the problem. The right thinks that Black Americans would be so easily duped.
Wow. You know what? I never even thought of that angle until you said that. That it is a slight.
It is a slight. That's exactly right. It is. And, you know, I give this example. It's one counter example, and obviously things are more complicated than this. But when Prop 8 came up in California about gay marriage, a lot of Black Californians are religious Christians. And in their churches, there is a relatively like anti-gay view. So even though they do vote for Democrats in general, they didn't vote with Democrats on Prop 8 because they decided that they were against gay marriage. So if their number one sort of like priority was just doing what Democrats want, they would have voted in favor of gay marriage on Prop 8, and they didn't. So clearly they are thinking for themselves. American Jews are thinking for themselves, and it's sort of insulting to suggest that these groups are just so easily tricked.
Yeah, no, it's more branding. I just had never thought of it like that. Wow, it's pretty dope actually that you framed it like that, man. Do you have any instances of where the opposite is true, as far as Republican policies that don't necessarily favor minorities?
Oh yeah, I mean, of course. So first, I mean, number one, voter suppression. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the left, by and large, wants to increase voter turnout. The right is almost exclusively responsible for stricter voter ID laws, limited voting hours, reduction in the number of polling places, and it's done strategically. What we're seeing in Georgia right now, for example, you have a really great candidate, the first major party Black nominee, Stacey Abrams, who's the Democratic nominee. She's running pretty even with Brian Kemp, and there's been this strategic move to close down polling places and early voting locations in disproportionately Black areas. Like, that's just disenfranchisement. There's no, whatever policy you want once you get elected, trying to make it so that certain groups have a harder time voting, that's just disenfranchisement, period.
Wow. You hear these things, right? And then, but when you actually break them down, it's kind of gross. It is gross. Sick.
It is. I mean, the other thing, you know, with the policy on the right is a lot of they claim to be against regulation. The right is always about, we've got to deregulate, we've got to give businesses freedom to, you know, exist in our capitalist system and make money. We don't want to restrict their ability to make money, and everybody's better off if the corporations are able to make a ton of money. Well, not really, because the first thing that these corporations do when they're not regulated is they figure out who can be the bearer of our pollution, for example, when we manufacture products. And what you see very quickly is a lot of plastics and Teflon. There's a big case involving Teflon that is being settled right now. The runoff and the what we call negative externalities, like the outside bad things that are caused by a lot of these business practices, disproportionately impact people of color. They impact poor Hispanic areas, they impact poor Black areas, and that's a policy that the right wants. They say, get out of the way of business. Well, look at what business does when we get out of the way. So I think when you get down into the details, there's definitely like an overlap between the racial impact and the economic impact. But in this country, because of the history of the country, those things are very linked. Yeah. And you don't have to look very far to find examples of it.
Yeah, no, I was always a proponent of like racism is the cousin of classism, and people in power have always used that double barrel to bury people in this country, and it's an issue. I want to touch on that and then jump ships really quick because there's something I want to get into, but. Tell me if I'm extremely off in this thinking. I've said this before on my podcast, but from the research that I've done and the reading I've done on like Marxism or socialism in general, I just find this huge ironic point. And tell me if I'm off on this. A lot of people who are proponents of the free market and anti-socialism or anti-Marxism, they're usually extremely religious people, right? Like Christian or Jewish or whatever the case may be. I just find it extremely ironic that when people die, they kind of want to live in a communist state. Like that, like heaven is, it describes almost to a T what communism is. And it's hilarious to me that that's what they aspire to live in, because to me the whole thing about socialism is like I'm a multimillionaire, right? So I don't mind paying high taxes because it distributes the wealth and it helps people who are not in. Because how much is it? How many cars do I need? How many houses do I need? And granted, yes, I work for it. I deserve every dollar, right? But I understand that it takes a village, right? Like that's just how I grew up. But people who are extremely religious, and granted, I'm definitely throwing a veil over everybody, and it's stereotyping. But the majority, it fits in this category, is that the ideology of heaven and communism are kind of the exact same thing.
I guess I'm interested in this. I don't know enough about like specifically how different religions see heaven to say for sure. Like what is it about how they do? Is it that everybody's equal
everybody's equal?
There's no such thing as money because it's heaven.
There's dictator.
And there's one power. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, I mean, listen, that's one of many hypocrisies that sort of exists there. The other one that's more obvious is they claim to want to be in a free market except for when they don't. Like they tend to want subsidies for oil. That's not a free market. We could talk about other examples. But yeah, I mean, you're identifying that there is a double standard that exists when it comes to a lot of these ideologies. And when it kind of gets down to the rubber meeting the road, there's always exceptions. It's like, yes, we want deregulation except where regulation's good for us. We want a free market except when we want our industry to be protected in some way. So yeah, I mean, the heaven one is an interesting one. I'm gonna have to think more about that.
Do you think that like things like Politicon are good?
Like, not really. I mean, I said, so I participated in Politicon last weekend, and it's, so there's this movement right now all about like, let's get all of the ideas out on the table and figure out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense and have debate. And that's all really great. But I mentioned earlier that debating in bad faith is not really that useful. And it's not that Politicon leads to debating in bad faith, but it's sort of set up to be kind of like political disaster porn. They are setting it up to be sort of like, how can we get people whose personalities are going to clash with each other? How can we get people yelling and that type of thing? I think that there is good stuff that happened at Politicon and some pretty good conversations. Like I was on a panel about fake news, which was pretty good. But there's, is anybody coming away from some of those debates with like a better understanding of the issues, or are they just kind of coming away with the idea of like who yelled the loudest or got the best insults in? I don't know. I have doubts about it.
Yeah, no, I think it's all about, it's of course like it's everything, but it's kind of individual. Like I think it's good if you come in with some kind of humility, right? So I watched I think it's Sam Cedar and Charlie Kirk. And,
yep.
And when you just really get down to the crux of both points, you can kind of see where there's substance and where there's not substance. That's just my opinion. But I think it's the crowds, bro. I think like the crowds being there is the stupidest idea in the world.
Well, here's the thing. If you just step back and think about like everybody that's into politics, right? And I know a lot of people in my personal life that are into politics. I don't know anybody who would fly across the country to go to Politicon. And this isn't an insult. Like it was great. I met, I must have taken hundreds of pictures there and I met a ton of fans of the show and it was great. But the point is, by definition, people who are going to book flights and maybe take time off from work and get a hotel to go see people engage in these debates, many of which are just like yelling at each other.
Right.
It caters to extremes, and it's not all extremists that are there, but there were a lot of extremists there. And those are also not people who are going to sort of be convinced that maybe their views are wrong, like the way you were saying about critically analyzing your own beliefs. So by definition, it's sort of like it appeals to people who want to see like political blood sports or whatever name you kind of want to assign to it.
Yeah, no, 100%. I kind of want to jump, man, and I don't want to keep you too long, man. Let me know if we're running too long, but I really enjoyed talking to you, man.
Sure, yeah.
You touched on the Israel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I am nowhere near an expert in. So anytime I talk to somebody, it's really just trying to gain knowledge about it.
Yep.
There's so many different ways to attack this. So I guess I'll just start with the issue that's going on. Well, this is what triggered my interest in it. Was I was watching Republican debates one year, and Israel came up, and it was almost like this chain reaction of bombs that said, I was like, I'm pro-Israel, I'm more pro-Israel. And to me, it just raised the red flag. Like, why the fuck are we so pro-Israel? Like I said, I know not a lot about this at all. So when I'm asking this, it's purely for my own interest. Why is the U.S. in bed and so much? Why do we have so much invested in Israel?
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot. I mean, where do we even like dig into this, right?
Exactly.
So let's see. So let's talk about the right first a little bit. So there's kind of like two things going on with the right and their support for Israel. One is that there is this movement on the right. It's a pretty extreme Christian movement, which believes they're waiting for the second coming of Christ. And they believe that is going to happen through their support of Israel. So it's not even about really figuring out the conflict. It's not really about understanding the history. They literally think that their religious calling to get the second coming of Christ to happen is through their support of Israel. So you have like all these evangelical groups that love supporting Israel.
I've heard that part, but it's just, all right, go ahead. That's hard to hear.
So that's number one. Number two, you have people on the right who also don't really care about the conflict, but they see it sort of like our relationship with Saudi Arabia, which is Saudi Arabia and Israel are two of the countries in the Middle East with like a higher degree of stability. And we can do arms deals and we can support the companies that donate a ton of money to us, the defense contractors and the others. And so kind of like that's their doorway into supporting Israel. the problem with talking about this issue is that you basically cannot get anybody to accept that your position is sort of like your sincerely held position. Like whenever I talk about this, there will be people on the left who say, David, you can't be trusted on this issue because you're Jewish, so you're biased. To which I always would say, can we not trust anybody who's part of the LGBT community on the issue of what rights they should have because they're biased? Right. Which is, it's a very dumb argument, right? So that's number one. Where I come down on this is that I am very critical of the current administration that's running Israel, which is the Netanyahu administration. Like, I'm on the left and Netanyahu is on the right. And I don't think that he wants peace. I think he benefits, sort of like George W. Bush benefited from the global war on terror. Right. Netanyahu benefits from almost being at some big next invasion. So I think that, like, right now, the people that are in charge are a disaster, and I think that they need to be voted out immediately. Where the left sometimes gets angry with me is that I don't believe that Israel is this sort of like unilateral bad actor who's looking to kill Palestinians, and a pretty like simple analysis would indicate that there's really no upside to them to doing that, right? Like, number one, they have the weapons where if they wanted to really kill a lot of Palestinians, they could have done it. They could have killed a lot more Palestinians, and they don't do that, and they could anytime. But more importantly, like, when one Palestinian dies, left-wing media goes absolutely nuts criticizing them. So, like, what exactly is the upside? Like, if it's some kind of bloodthirst, they're doing a pretty poor job because they're not killing that many people compared to the number that they could. Right. And the PR benefit is just not there. So I think that it's one of these situations where, like, if you get dropped into it right now, it's sort of like if Martians showed up, if there were Martians and they came to Earth right now, and we tried to explain to them, like, why race relations are the way they are in the US, they would all be like, wait a second. So, like, you're all Homo sapiens, you're all humans, and you all could live in peace, but you're arguing because there are, like, certain people that don't like other people whose skin is a certain color. Like, Martians wouldn't understand racism if they were dropped in right now. But then, like, if you go back a couple hundred years, you kind of understand the context of it. Right. I think there's a similar problem in Israel right now, right, where there's no understanding how the current status quo is the status quo and has gone on for so long, unless you go all the way back sort of to the beginning. Right. And people are very ideologically tied on the issue, and it's a pretty toxic minefield to even talk about it.
100%, and that's why I haven't done enough due diligence, is because exactly what you said. There's just that, you want to talk about an emotional political issue, that is super huge. And so a basic rundown is, and this is just for me, like I said, bro, Israel became a state, and we backed that state in that territory where the natives say that's not your land, and the Israelis say it is, and is the only justification for it being their land the Bible?
Okay, so there are religious people who will make legal claims to the land on both sides. I don't care about those claims at all. Like, I'm not religious. I don't think that that's really an interesting argument, because arguing about something you claim God wrote when I believe people wrote it, I think it's a waste of time. So I don't get involved in that at all. But yes, there are people who make legal claims to the land. What's important, I think, to understand is that basically all countries on our planet, the only planet we have right now, are created in three ways, right? Either by war, meaning you take it over forcibly and make it part of your country, or make it a country; by annexation, which can include, like, purchase, so like when the United States did the Louisiana Purchase; and by international treaty or decree. In the case of what now is Israel, not the exact current borders, and this is controversial because it relates to settlements and a lot of other details that we could get into, but the original borders of Israel were decreed by international treaty. So there are people who will try to question sort of like the legitimacy of Israel even being a country. on the basis that that was done like a little more recently, like it was about 70 years ago,
Right.
instead of hundreds of years ago, like some other countries. I don't think that is a legitimate argument, because like I said, there are three ways that countries are created, and Israel was created in one of those three ways. So I don't think that that's actually the controversial part. Right. A lot of people also do misunderstand. They imagine that there was this country, Palestine, which in 1948 was just turned into Israel. That's not actually the way it was, right? So you had the British Mandate of Palestine, which was under the control of England. You had the land at one point sort of administered by Jordan. And in fact, you have part of the old city, the Temple Mount, which is still administered in that way. So it's very complicated, and I don't even know that it's the exact details are what matter. But I think the point is that there's nothing in particular about the 1948 lines that are where we should be focusing. I think the focus should be on settlements and the security situation right now.
And see, that's why I don't see how you can reconcile those things. Like, to me, this seems like an ever-flowing conflict that's just gonna go on until somebody does something real stupid.
I fear the same thing.
If you had a magic wand that you could wave over it, how would you fix it?
Okay, so I would do a two-state solution, which means you basically create two countries. You have Israel and you have Palestine, if that's the name that's agreed upon. As far as the borders, I would go to what are called the 1967 borders. And again, you kind of have to dig into the issue to figure out exactly like which version of the borders do you want. I would go to the 67 borders. I think that it would be important. So Israel has built settlements over the current into what are called the occupied territories over the last several decades, which I'm against. I recognize that it's going to be very unlikely that in an agreement, Israel would agree to give up all of that land at this point that they've basically taken and built stuff on. So I think that what you need to do there is whatever amount of land those settlements are on, you've got to trade something for it, and it can't be like crappy land, right? You need to figure out like, okay, here are like 20 square miles that we'll say are part of Israel going forward. We've got to give like an equivalent 20 square miles, or maybe even a little more than that, to the Palestinian state, and that's going to have to be negotiated. I think that East Jerusalem needs to be part of the Palestinian state. And I think that you have to figure out a way to end the blockade, which prevents supplies and things from getting into the Palestinian territories. And I think it's also important to figure out a way. So the Palestinian territories are separated right now, like they don't touch. You have to figure out some way for that to be like a contiguous. People need to be able to go between one and the other in a way that feels like it's actually a country, like one country. Right. I don't know exactly how you would do it, but I think that would be important also.
100%. See, it's just such a multifaceted issue. I don't even know if that's fair, man. That's how I have no idea to discern that would, man, it's just something that's like you're fighting ghosts, right? Like people who feel a certain way about it feel it on a doctrine, like you said, that was written by men, and the other side feels the exact same way. And so right. when you're sitting here fighting each other's ghosts battles, like there's just no way.
And the other thing is, right now, the people in charge on both sides are not going to fix this. Right. And you might be right that it might never be fixed until somebody takes some kind of horrible, decisive action. But right now, you've got the Netanyahu administration in Israel, which is very right-wing. It's aligned with really extreme religious elements. They're not going to fix it. They're not going to be parties to real peace. And on the other side, you unfortunately have Hamas, which is an extremist group in control of the Gaza Strip, and they are not good faith actors. And we don't even have to go into all the details of what they're doing, but these are just not the parties that are going to fix the problem, period. And Jared Kushner is also certainly not going to fix the problem.
Right. Jesus, man. It's sad, man, when you look at, I mean, we'll kind of wrap with this, man, because I don't want to take any more of your time, but like that exact example right there of an issue that has been going on for decades. It's extremely emotional, and it's part of your expertise. politics is your expertise. This is what you do. How have you kind of guarded yourself from the emotional backlash that comes from somebody on the opposition, or just in general, like you or your family, because it's a real thing.
You just kind of get numb to it, I feel like.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else you can do it, because every day it's like, if you look on my YouTube channel, there's 1,000 negative comments, you know?
Right.
So like, there's really, if you're going to talk about, and even like what I just said to you, everything I just said about how I would see a solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict looking, there will be people on the right and the left who will see this, and they will say, I'm a shill and an ideologue, for different reasons. They won't even agree about why, right? Like, there will be people on the right who say that I'm way off on this, and people on the left who say I'm way off on this. What can I do? You know, it's like, I'm making the best assessments I can at the time with the information I have. That's really all I can do.
You know, I mean, I agree 100%. You're always you get in a room full of people, somebody gonna disagree with you, but I think it's especially interesting when your livelihood is speaking on these issues. You know what I mean? So it's like, I'm very new to politics, and it's extremely interesting to me. And the more I grow, the more I'm going to understand about these kind of issues. And even some of the stances I take now, I've gotten death threats over. Right?
I'm sure.
Yeah, and so somebody who's inundated in the political culture as you, it would just, like, if you were like my kin, I'd be like, yo, take care of yourself out there.
Yeah, no, I mean, and look at what happened this week, right? I mean, bombs sent to George Soros and Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and CNN and maybe even some others that we're just learning about. This is real stuff, and people become radicalized in different ways, and it's what can you say? It's a real thing.
So how about like, mostly what I do is I do music, I do this podcast, and it's not necessarily politically based. But how I unwind is I turn on people like you and see what's going on. Let me just relax and see what's going on in the news today. Break down this issue, yada yada. Like, how do you do that?
Netflix shows, playing chess, and running, I guess.
Gotcha. Do you have a chess app? We'll get. We'll swap.
Oh yeah, are you on Lead Chess?
Nah, I'll get it though.
Okay. Yeah, I play on Lead Chess and on chess.com.
Okay, bet. Well,
I'm not good though. That's the thing.
I mean, who is? You know. No, for sure, man. But dog, I appreciate your time, and I know I kept you a long little while, man. But
no problem.
You're extremely good at what you do. I think that you're one of the few people out there, on your side of politics that tries to, like I said, tries to give honest critique about the current situations, and is always trying to grow and think, and I appreciate it, because I'm nowhere near as, like I said, inundated as you are, but as I'm finding my own way in this world, people like you give hope to people like me that rational discourse can be had, and you can go about this society in a civil manner, man. So I appreciate it.
Thank you. No, and likewise, I've been keeping an eye on what you're doing, and I think it's great. And you've definitely got what you have that is really important that some people don't have when they do this and start doing interviews, is just the ability to just have a conversation with the other person in a way where it's just like a conversation, and it seems genuine, and that is huge. And like when you were on Joe Rogan, I mean, I think one of the things he has is that ability as well, where you're just kind of like, you're observing a conversation that real people are having, which is awesome. So I encourage you to keep doing it. And by the way, my producer's vegan, and he wanted me to ask you if you are still vegan.
I got you. Nah, man, I'm not. I started to in 2012. That's when I started it, and I didn't last, but it's like 6-7 months. Mm-hmm. I'm extremely, and I'm an advocate for a plant-based lifestyle, but for me, it was just too. I didn't want to have to think about what I ate every single day. You have to plan every single, because not every restaurant has vegan options. Not every place you go has vegan place. So it's just like, what if I die earlier? I die earlier, and who knows? Because you see studies on both sides of too much plant-based can do this, and too much meat can do this. So it's like, it's just, you get lost in the information. So everything in moderation is my key now.
All right. Well, he's going to be disappointed, but I'll let him know.
I bet, man. I know for those vegans are I got a lot of hate mail from that, man. You traitor. No, but I appreciate you, man. But we end the show the same way every time, man. When I started this, I set a real lofty goal, and I said I want to have Jim Carrey on my podcast. So we've asked everybody who's been on my podcast to kind of advocate for Jim Carrey. We've had Snoop Dogg on. We have a lot of great people on. So we've asked everybody from my mother to Snoop Dogg to try to get Jim Carrey to advocate him to come on the podcast, man. So if you could do the same, I'd highly appreciate it.
Why Jim Carrey? I'm curious.
So Jim Carrey is somebody who, one, I grew up loving.
Right.
Two, I think he is in a place in his life right now where he says some really outlandish shit. And sometimes it makes so much sense that I just want to dig in. You know, it's like sometimes it doesn't, but it's just like I have to know about this character, man. And he says he said one of the things that was really like it just breathtaking to me. He said we're all fields of energy dancing for itself. It's poetically beautiful and like scientifically accurate. That's exactly what's going on. Every single thing is energy. Sometimes
he makes a lot more sense than Deepak Chopra.
You know, I think that's a whole nother conversation, but I would agree with that, man. But yeah. So I've asked everybody to get him on, man, to advocate for me, man. So if you could do that, I highly appreciate it.
Cool. Yeah. When the episode is out, I will tweet it to him and say he should appear on the show.
No. So what I'm saying is like, so people look at the camera and they'll be like, yo, Jim, so we're going to put together like a video montage.
Oh, you want me to do it right now? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Jim Carrey, please do Arian's show. It's a great show. He's a great interviewer and everybody wants to hear from you.
That's good enough, man. I highly appreciate it, dog. Well, if anybody, we'll flash your @ so if anybody wants to find you or anything you want to promote, man, you plug or whatever, you can go ahead. You're good.
Follow me on Twitter, D Pakman, and become a subscriber on YouTube. It's free.
It is, man, and donate because I love the content and I appreciate the work that you do, boss.